Moving on from the property description, we're going to move to the timing tab. The timing tab is where you define where your analysis begins. So the actual date on when you want to start analyzing the cash flows of the property that you just defined in the property description. The analysis start date by default is the current date on the system that you're operating on. So right now my default is April of 2015 as my analysis start date. The analysis start date is not necessarily your current date, but would more likely be when you or the entity you are representing will actually be taking ownership of the property and receiving the cash flows that we are defining in our model. So the analysis start date would likely be set out in the future when the acquisition is to have happened and when you are actually receiving the cash flows for the property. Alternatively, if you're looking for the present value or the current value of the property from an appraisal perspective, the analysis start date may be the current date that you're in. This is very important for the office industrial property that we have set up, because most likely there are current tenants that are occupying this property, are currently paying rent, and they are going to be paying rent for a defined amount of time that's defined by the lease that they currently have in place. We'll cover a bit of that later, but it's very important to note that the analysis start date isn't necessarily the current date, but when you are going to receive cash flows from this property. Reporting start date, very similar to the analysis start date, but when the actual fiscal reporting for this property is going to begin. The number of years to report, or end date, defines how long the model is going to project out our cash flows in the future. So by default, it's set at 10 years. Typically, years to report is how long you or the entity that is acquiring the property plans on owning the property for. You're not only projecting out the valuation of the property that you currently have, but the property is very influenced in the long run by what the value is at time of sale. There's a number of different ways of determining that value that we will discuss later, but the default of 10 years is very useful for those purposes.